And there may be some dropouts due to low quality internet here. Try our best. Did folks get a notification that we're recording?
Yep.
No, I didn't see that. Oh yeah, okay, good. So thanks everybody for joining. This is our learning circle number 2 for our land-based pedagogy. My name is Irwin Oostindie. I'm with the Wildbird Trust of BC, and super grateful to be here on the unceded Tsleil-Waututh lands, joined by our Secretary of the Board, Les George, and I want to say good morning to Les.
Oh, see you.
Hello, Les. Want to bring us in a good way?
Thanks, Irwin. Welcome, everybody. As Irwin mentioned, my name's Les George. My father's from Squamish. My mother's Tsleil-Waututh. I myself am Tsleil-Waututh, and Tsleil-Waututh means people of the inlet. And that's who I am. My mother, my grandmother, my grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on. And being people of the inlet, we're protectors of this land. We help keep these lands and maintain them. And it's an honor for me to welcome you guys here today. These are the ways in our teachings of how we did it. Before we start in a good, kind way. And one of the ways that we did that was through song. And the song I'd like to share with you is our clan song. And if you're in our village, you'll know you're in our village by seeing the street banners with the wolf on it. And that's which clan we are. We're part of the Wolf Clan, Tikaya in our language. So again, I raise my hands, and when we raise our hands, we raise it in thanks. And I'd like to thank you all for being here, and I welcome you all. Oh, see you. Oh, hello, 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 hello. Oh, hello, 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 hello. Oh, hello, 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 hello. Oh, hello, 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 hello. Oh, shoot. Once again, I thank you. I welcome you all to the Tsleil-Waututh territory. Oh, see you.
Thank you, Les. And so much of what you're saying in terms of setting the stage is really why we're here. It's all about recognizing whose lands we're on. And for too long, the Wildbird Trust of BC, 31 years, we've been stewarding your lands, but only for the last 7 have we done it with Tsleil-Waututh, with a recognition of Tsleil-Waututh. And now we're very proud to be the first, maybe one of the first conservation organizations in Western Canada that has surrendered control of our operations to the local First Nations. So now our board of directors is run by Tsleil-Waututh community members, and we're very proud of that. It's how the work starts. It's really not the finishing line. It's the way we were starting. And Les, I really want to lift my hands up to you for your 3 years of work on the board, and our board president, Karen Thomas, sends her regrets. She'll join later if she can.
Clan song.
Who did? And we're here today because we've got some beautiful work to do to carry this journey forward. Like I said, surrendering control from a white birding organization, that's rooted in white supremacy in terms of the way we see the world, the way we use Western science, we weaponize Western science against Indigenous knowledge, the language we use, the procedures we used, the displacement that we enacted by protecting this land. it served to advance colonialism. And so what we need to do now is to not just do the work of repair and repairing those relationships, but we also need to bring people forward with us, because the work is not done. The work is only starting now. And how we do that is really important. And that's very much what today is about. It's the systems of knowledge that we use, the methods, the epistemology, the understandings of why we do things, the words we use, the traditions that we're rooted in. And so not to say, oh, we have good intentions and we make those mistakes. It's better, especially if we want to be innovative and we want to be leaders in this space, and we want to innovate around land back, and we want to normalize land back, and we want land back not just to happen here, but we want land back to happen across the province. We want it to happen across the country. And so learning in a spirit of solidarity, of mutual aid with the Creator's Garden is very, very important to us. It's central to our work to understand that we can't do this alone, and we can scale up much faster if we're working together and learning from each other. And what our hopes are is that we can create an educational and training program here that settler accomplices, and I'm using that word deliberately from our late friend Cleve and Ali, accomplices, not allies. We really want settlers to show up and do this heavy lifting, because we know there's too few Coast Salish people, there's too few First Nations people to do all this ending of colonialism. It's a settler system that settlers profit from and benefit from, and settlers have to show up to do that work of dismantling colonialism. And we do it with the direction and leadership of First Nations. And this is an area of Canada that is specifically First Nations. There's no Métis settlements, there's no Inuit communities here. So we're specifically talking about Tsleil-Waututh. And we're not doing pan-nativism. We're not enacting Anishinaabe law here in Coast Salish territory, nor do we purport that, you're gonna learn from Coast Salish traditions. But there is teachings that we can learn, especially today, around how do we educate community members? And how do we do it in such a way that lifts up Tsleil-Waututh's sovereignty rights? So we're not just performing reconciliation, we're not just performing redress. We want to figure out a way that every contribution we make with our labor advances Tsleil-Waututh's sovereignty rights. And it's not just about, decolonizing a birding organization or finishing a land back project, but it's about creating larger change that inspires hope for other people and other First Nations and other settler allies trying to figure out how to take those next steps. So the lessons we can teach people, the trainers work that we can do in the next 2, 3, 4 years is going to be guided by the work we're doing today. And I want to lift my hands up to Heléna Mauti, who's helping us with this work, and she's going to carry us forward with this session. And really excited to be here and grateful for everybody showing up on the Zoom and here in person here at Maplewood Flats Nature House.
Thanks, Irwin, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone, depending on where you are. I think you set us up really well there, Irwin, to have this cross land and water conversation today. Myself and Junaid and Andrés, we're coming from Anishinaabe territory in what's colonially known as Ontario. I'm speaking to you all today from Mississauga, Anishinaabe territory, and the headwaters of the Grand River, the Humber River, the Credit River, and the Nottawasaga River. And I place myself here in accountability to those waters and accountability to Anishinaabe who have taken care of these waters and this territory since time immemorial. And the work that I do, I'm an educator at Trent University in the Indigenous Environmental Studies and Science program. And I have a high accountability in the work that I do to upholding Anishinaabe sovereignty, Anishinaabe knowledge systems and cultures. And the work that we're doing today is bringing together Anishinaabe knowledges, Anishinaabe sovereignty, and hopefully we can have some conversation with the Coast Salish knowledges and sovereignty as well. We're grateful to have Junaid and Andrés from Creator's Garden here with us today. A trio with Joe Pitawanakwat as well. And I'm going to read your bio. I took off your website that you're dedicated to regathering and the education of bird names and significant Indigenous bird knowledges. These knowledges that help us live the life that the Great Lakes region has to offer. Mano Bamadzawin, Anishinaabe Moen is the good life. And so in September's Learning Circle, if any of you attended, I was speaking about this return to kinship and how we can understand a role of land-based education that supports Indigenous-led conservation, like what's happening at Maplewood Flats. It supports Indigenous sovereignty and land back. So today we're continuing to understand, how do we learn about the land? How do we learn with the land, specifically about birds, in today's conversation, in a way that is affirming, upholding, working towards Indigenous sovereignty. And today we have a presentation, like I said, from Andrés and Junaid, who are going to be enlightening us with their perspectives on these big questions about the roles of settlers in how we learn in responsible ways, how we're striving towards Indigenous sovereignty, and what that looks like. So I'll turn it over to you guys. I know you have a presentation for us, and I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourselves as well. Miigwech.
Oh, that was amazing. Miigwech. And thank you also to Lace for that beautiful opening and opening song. And this is a real pleasure and privilege to be here. So we'll have a bit of an intro of ourselves as we get going. So if everybody's all right with it, I'll just kick things off and introduce us. Can you see my screen? I know I already confirmed this, but
yes, we can.
it's not moved. Okay, there we go. So our project is centered around a physical and metaphorical canoe, which we once crossed a river in, much to everybody's chagrin, but my utter confidence, because I believe in this canoe. Nobody else believed in it. Because it has no seats. It's just very wide. Joe called it a moose hunting canoe. I was like, sure. And so we piled into this canoe, 4 of us humans. That includes Joe's daughter, Ruth, Andrés, and myself.
And a dog, which is the worst birding dog.
Rosie as well. I always forget about Rosie, but Rosie must be acknowledged because she always chases the birds away. So our work really centers around a lot of Joseph Pitawanakwat's on-the-ground work over the last 12 years, being in community all across Ontario, into the United States, on Anishinaabe territory, working with plant knowledge and plant medicine specifically. But he himself would joke that he never really liked plants. It was just something that his grandmother knew an incredible amount about, and he spent a lot of time with her, and it just became a responsibility that it continues to uphold. But he loves birds and has always loved birds. So whenever he would go out into communities, he would try to get people to come out who knew something about the local birds, or bird knowledge, had names or explanations or something like that. And so over those 12 years, Joe collated quite a massive list of bird names, some of which he had some sense of them, what they could be relating to, and many just being names and with vague descriptions as it is a small brown bird. In his love of birds, Joe headed down to Costa Rica for a trip and met Andrés Jiménez Monge, who infected me with the disease of birding about 8 years ago. But because he was already infected with it, Joe and him really started to figure out what could be done with the work that Joe had already collated, through the lens of creating educational resources that would help in trying to chisel away at the struggle of educating people of the knowledge that exists in Anishinaabe Moin. So Andrés at the time was working with an organization called, at the time it was Bird Studies Canada, now they're Birds Canada. And he was working as their urban program coordinator, and was really kind of tasked with trying to diversify and create more inclusion and inclusive programming for Birds Canada, in line with the landscape that has always been. But they came around. So that was Andres's work, and through that work, him and Joe started to develop this idea of trying to create like an indigenous bird guide. And it evolved into our project, which is the Birds of Anishinaabe Ake, Ake being the Anishinaabe-Moine word for land. And I am I'm the back end of the team whose work has primarily been in ecology. So Andrés and I met doing our masters. I'm an ecologist by trade and do a lot of things with native plants and pollinators and bugs and all that stuff. But my key contribution and connection to this work is I started learning Anishinaabe-Moine about 6 years ago, about a year or two before this project had even been conceived, and kind of became the writer for the project and the person who now, thankfully, graciously have developed enough relationships in language communities to kind of be able to bounce our work off of those who know more. So our work started with a talk that Andrés conducted for the Toronto Public Library. I'll pass it over to him to chat us through the next few minutes.
There are some things that need clarification before I get there. First of
Yep.
all, hello, everyone.
The biologist always clarifies.
Yes. Les, thank you so much for this digital invitation to your territory. I really appreciate it every time that I'm invited to land. I hope that I get to actually put my feet in the land at some point when I get to the beautiful West Coast someday. Someday is one of my targets. Second, Junaid is not only our writer, but he is the one that organizes Joe's time as well, and that keeps all of us kind of glued together. And then I would like to say that Junaid and I are non-Indigenous to Canada. Junaid, I believe, is Indigenous to Pakistan, and I might be defined as Métis in Costa Rica. That's what we grow up understanding, but our Métis understanding is not a legal understanding in Costa Rica. It's more of a reproductive consequence of colonization with Indigenous groups in the country. And so I bring my biology and my understanding in biology, but I also try to bring the understanding of indigeneity in Central and South America to this, which has become incredibly interesting. And so when Junaid and I, and that this is the third clarification, I didn't make this talk, it was definitely the three of us, because Junaid helped me with the material, I was the host, and Junaid was, and Joe was the one that was invited. And we were like, hey, why don't we do a, decolonizing bird names kind of thing? Because at the time was the movement of bird names for birds, and I didn't fully understand this movement, though I understand the need for it. I've read your most recent journal, Wingspan, and I saw some people there we talked to. I believe we were the only Indigenous group they talked to at the time when they were doing the assessment of, and I'm not calling myself Indigenous, but the work we were doing was Indigenous related. We were the only ones that were interviewed to see the need or identify the need and possibilities for changing the names of birds. And so we moved forward to do this presentation, and I'm kind of wondering if anyone, maybe you will not know because you're from the West Coast, if anyone knows the name, the old name, but not the oldest name for the bird in the screen. Maybe Heléna.
So this is an oceanic duck, and I do believe that you could end up with them on the West Coast as well, but yeah.
No takers.
Any guesses? No takers? Okay. So when I came to Canada, this was one of the most beautiful ducks I saw. And I knew nothing about North American birds. I was not a birder. I was mostly into snakes, frogs, amphibians, sharks, whales. I had done a lot of work in Costa Rica in everything but birds. I had gotten an interest in birds that obviously gets explored every time I go into other places because birds are very salient. And then I saw this thing, and when I started asking kind of the less progressive birders, I would ask, hey, what's that bird? And they would say, oh, that's an old squaw. If people are not familiar with the term, could you explain that to us, Junaid?
It is kind of well, as most English pronunciations of indigenous terminology go, a bad one. Essentially, the word kwe or sque in Cree is the word for woman. And so old squaw would refer to this duck being an old First Nation woman.
Yes.
And why, Andrés?
It's because they gather in groups and they cackle. And so that's how they were compared to old squaw. And many indigenous women here are retaking and reclaiming the squaw as being really a sign of wisdom and so many other things. And then there was a movement at some point in which the American Ornithologists Union received a request from the US Fish and Wildlife Department in Alaska saying, that they wanted to change the name of this duck because it was offending elders, it was offending indigenous women, it was offending indigenous people all at the same time. And this was problematic. And funny enough, they were thinking about this in Alaska, right? Not even where the name might have been used. And so the American Ornithologists Union in July 2000, 1st of July 2000, stated that political correctness was not sufficient to change the name, but to conform with English usage in other parts of the world, meaning England, where this duck was called long-tailed duck, they will officially adopt the long-tailed duck name. And so this is kind of what prompted everything. And then here we started thinking about everything. If anyone is curious about it, the scientific name of that bird is Clangula ayemalis, which literally means the sound of winter. So much better than old squaw. And so let's talk for a moment about scientific names, because scientific names are the basis of the Western taxonomy. And we will eventually talk about Anishinaabe taxonomy and what we've learned about it. And so can anyone choose, just kind of shout it out, which one of these photos represents a hedgehog?
A.
The first one.
Do we have any dissenting opinions? I hear no dissenting opinions. So they're all hedgehogs. One is a hedgehog mammal. The other one is a hedgehog cactus. And the other one is a hedgehog mushroom. And so given that common names can refer to many creatures at the same time, and this also includes indigenous names, Western biologists decided to create scientific names. The scientific names describe and classify species, and they give a unique name to the species as we understand them. So this name, Erinaceus europaeus, which is the hedgehog, can be used in China, can be used in Costa Rica, and can be used in Canada. By the way, they are based in Latin, so Spanish is a relatively close pronunciation to how they are supposed to be pronounced. It is very useful for management decisions. For example, there was a time in which a species of gull, a subspecies of gull that had a different scientific name, was changed. Its taxonomy was put into the same scientific name of another gull, and then all the protections that would put in place on this island for this specific subspecies of gull were removed, because then that gull was just part of another gull that had so many more individuals. And so scientific names impact management decisions. For example, a lot of the tree cutting in Costa Rica, they would just cut trees and name them with common names. And so given that people couldn't tell that they were very rare endangered species, they would just be able to cut all the trees that were endangered. And so scientific names matter in that way when it comes to Western management. And so some scientific names are good, like Erinaceus europaeus or like Clangula ayemalis, and some are really crappy because some scientists are very, very not creative. And so we have camera lens, which is a unicellular organism, and then we have a haha, which is another unicellular organism that, people just call them like that. Next one, Junaid. And so now we come to one of the topics that was complicated and one of the reasons why some bird names needed to be rethought. There is one more hit, Junaid, please.
Mhm.
There is this guy who is known as the father of ornithology and the father of bird guides, whose name is John James Audubon. And he made tremendous contribution to birds. And so he got eponyms, birds dedicated to him. Audubon's warbler, which is about time for us to correct the scientific name. That should be Setophaga coronata. Junaid, this is the 5th presentation in which we've got that name wrong. And then we have the Audubon's oriole, right? This name, if I say this to a new birder, a kid, and I say, well, that's an Audubon's oriole, they will go like, so what's Audubon and what's oriole? And this means very little to anyone. The scientific name can codify better information, but the common name is really, truly not codifying anything. If you look into Audubon, you will find out that he participated in the battle. Well, first of all, he was a slave owner, and thanks to him having slaves and his family coming from a plantation, he was able to paint all the birds that he first killed and then painted. And then in many cases, he did even worse things, like in the Battle of San Jacinto in 1836, when mostly white Texans defeated a Mexican army not far from the present-day Houston. Audubon scoured the battlefield for the remains of Mexican soldiers. He decapitated several bodies and sent the heads to Samuel George Morton, a notorious practitioner of phrenology. Anyone knows what phrenology is here? Come on, come on. Anyone? Any takers?
Is it
There
the
you go.
study of skulls?
It is.
Racist real science based on trying to attribute characteristics such as like intelligence to the shape of the skull. That's my understanding of it.
If someone
It is not a science.
Yeah, if someone has seen the movie Django Unchained, Candy was a phrenologist, and it's a pseudoscience, we cannot call it a science, that attempted to use skull dimensions to prove the superiority of white Europeans to other races, particularly Black, Indigenous, Mexican people. And so now we have this oral statue for, you know, these warblers and orioles that represents the legacy of Audubon. And this is not about if this was a good or bad biologist, because there are many other birds that have the names of very incredible people, like Celedonia in Costa Rica. I think it's more about quality, about what these names represent and how much they inform, at least when it comes to the use of English. And you can now go case by case. Oh, this was a good guy, this was a bad guy. It doesn't work.
I would also like to clarify that the fact that I have a different genus name for what is now Setophaga just further explains the need for classifications that are based outside of the Western taxonomy, because that genus changed in the time that we had this presentation. Okay.
Why should we rethink them? Because many people don't think that, you know, Cardinal's magnificent path through millions of years of natural selection made it look like a Catholic authority. That is definitely not what natural selection was attempting to do. The cardinal, being named cardinal, means nothing to a Muslim or a Jew or many other people. And so we should rethink these names because they demonstrate inclusion. We could avoid alienating people that come from other religions. They can also improve our common understanding of creatures. And, you know, birds just deserve better. They give us too many gifts as for us not to, you know, return the gift to them by at least giving them a name or discovering a name for them that can refer to their gifts and their beauty.
So while we've been doing this work, one of the aspects that we come across a lot, which may not seem as sinister or obvious as eponyms, is the knowledge blending that occurs when Indigenous knowledge is accessed by Western science. So oftentimes there is essentially, like we saw with the old squaw, there is some recognition that there is a language here that we could utilize to actually refer to the bird, but we did it in the most insulting and least accurate way possible. And that is something that occurs within bird names or within pieces of knowledge that have been lost within communities and through, language loss of the reservations system, and you hear 60s scoop, all kinds of traumatic generational occurrences that have taken away pieces of knowledge or information are really easy to succumb to this idea of blending. So I guess an easy example for this concept is the snowy owl. I believe, its entire range is all of the Arctic, so maybe you guys have them in northern BC. Anyway, let me know if you do or don't. The snowy owl's name that we had repeatedly been shared with us, or we would find in online resources, was Wab Gokokok. And Gokokok is the general sort of what we now in our project consider like a family name for owls. And Wab is part of like Wab Shkwande is for something to be white. And so Wab Gokokok was like, it's the white owl. And there are a few alarm bells that kind of went off for us. The first being that
For Joe, mostly.
Well, yes, for the collective, because my issue with this name was that why would it just be white owl? Why would it not be the owl that lives in snow? Like white is not. And for Joe, the biggest error here was that it seemed too much like a transliteration. Essentially, it looked like some white researchers went into community, they had some pictures with them, they showed the pictures to some people that had language, may not have even had experience looking at any of these birds. They're not looking at them in the field. They're not really accessing this the way that the Anishinaabe knowledge system would require them to be able to name this bird. And so they show them, hey, this thing's a white owl, what would you call it? They're like, well, I guess we call it a white owl. And then that name becomes proliferated by publications, by dictionaries, by all these different people who are not actually able to, or perhaps in some cases willing to, engage with the knowledge from that sort of linguistic cultural lens. And so one of the things that is important to know is this idea of taxonomy, something that we've already touched on a little bit. But Andrés, can you tell me a little bit about just taxonomy, why we have it, and what the study is meant to be for?
All right, so taxonomy and phylogenetics or phylogeny is actually the word that I want to use. Taxonomy and phylogeny is a way that we use in Western scientific paradigms to group and classify life. And so we have these three species here. They're different species of crow. They're the common raven, the common crow, and the fish crow. By this common name, you might conclude that the raven is not related to the crow because it doesn't say crow in it. But if you pay attention to the scientific name, they all belong to the same genus, Corvus. And so when we use taxonomy and phylogeny, what we're doing is we're creating trees of life in which we use behavior, ecology, morphology, genetics to try to understand which organism is closer to which. And at the same time, which one is farther to which. So for example, if we were to use wings as a characteristic of a family or a group, then that would lead us to group birds, bats, and bees on the same group. And they are definitely not evolutionarily related. One is an insect, another one is a mammal, and another one is a bird. They are very, very far. And so through the use of taxonomy and the right characteristics, we try to separate life and to organize it on a way in which we know who's cousin with who and who's brother with who. And a lot of it is on who was the earlier common ancestor of certain groups. And that's why we can answer what was first, the chicken or the egg. Anyone has an answer here? What was first, chicken or the egg? Come on.
The egg. I don't know.
It was, why
The
the
egg?
egg? Why?
Oh, I don't know, the cells forming out of something. I'm not sure.
Well,
it could have
first
a
of
full
all,
life. So it could have a
first-
full life.
sorry?
So we could have a full life. The bird could
Kinda.
experience a full life.
Well, if we think about it from a taxonomic point and an evolution, because this is all based on Darwin's theory of evolution, first, eggs existed since dinosaurs. So eggs existed before a chicken ever existed. But before a chicken was born, there was an egg from something that was not a chicken, which is the common ancestor, that gave birth to an egg from which a chicken emerged. And so that's how you know that the egg is before than the chicken from a Western scientific perspective. Okay? That's what taxonomy is used for.
And so there's, for the longest time, we were trying to apply this similar taxonomic idea to the bird names that we would encounter, be like, oh, okay, so gokokok is kind of like saying the family of owls, and then there's different gokokoks, or bapase is talking about the family of woodpeckers, but then there's different woodpeckers. And that is absolutely true. That sort of taxonomic rule exists within Anishinaabe-Moyne as well. But the more complex and more interconnected view of taxonomy in Anishinaabe-Moyne is that you cannot speak about something without alluding to other parts of creation, and specifically without alluding to some part of yourself. So in Anishinaabe taxonomy, if you weren't to think about it that way, where you would potentially classify or group things together that are, more evolutionarily related, the same classification of the fish crow, and common raven would translate into the common raven, the eastern hemlock, the porcupine, and your uvula being in the same grouping. And the story that connects all of these pieces is what is kind of like the key component of our work, is trying to figure out what it is that the language is signifying when saying a name. So if you were to look at the name of Gaga-Gashi, that it being the common raven in Anishinaabe-Moyne, Gaga-Gashi has a connection to Gaga-Gamish. Gaga-Gamish being the eastern hemlock tree, which is frequented by common ravens as a nesting site. The eastern hemlock then also has a relationship, or rather, the gawk has a relationship with Gaga-Gamish, in which gawk, porcupines, have an absolute love for hemlock bark. They will demolish bark from a hemlock forest like you would not believe, leave massive piles of poop everywhere, but they're so cute. How can you not love them?
Yeah, look at that photo.
Gawk, yeah, I know. Gawk have that very particular and specific relationship with eastern hemlock. And then your Gaga-Gi, your uvula, is the part of your body that you utilize in order to mimic the sound of a raven.
Which Junaid will give us a demonstration.
I am very bad at it. I'm so sorry. So the taxonomic connection here being that if you look at Anishinaabeg storytelling, or the way that things came to be, if you look at the Anishinaabeg story of evolution, if you will, the occurrence of plants, or well, rocks and minerals came first, then came waters and those things, then came trees, then came birds, mammals, and then us. We're the last thing that ever got made. And so everything that we have is replicated somewhere originally in the world around us. And that is where you get the connection of Gog-Gog-Amish is probably the thing that came first. It then named Gog-Gog-Ashi. Gog-Gog-Ashi then saw Gok eating Gog-Gog-Amish, and then Gok got its name. And then we had to try to mimic the raven, because ravens and humans at large all across North America, but especially in Anishinaabeg and Cree communities, have a generational connection. Which, man, I could talk about that name for so long, but I won't, because Andrés is looking at me upset. So
Yeah, we're out of time.
I'll jump to the next slide, and then we'll get back to this question if people are still interested. But one of the other aspects that we come across frequently is the idea of dialects in Anishinaabe. You might hear, like, people speak the Minnesotan dialect, or the Odawa dialect, or the Curve Lake dialect. And something that I've come to learn from one of my teachers, Helen Roy, who's based out of Michigan and is like a first language speaker, is that dialects don't naturally exist in Anishinaabe. And I've come to understand them more as accents than dialects, because it's essentially like I went to Newfoundland for the first time, and I could swear to you some people there were speaking a different language, but they were speaking English. I could still understand them if I slowed them down enough, but I think the same occurrence has happened due to the reservation system and residential schools, in which communities were isolated. And that isolation led to the development of very specific accents, if you will. And then these accents are what communities have tried to codify in order to be like, this is our language. And so what we try to do in our project is to include the full vowel form of any given name, which essentially means that all of the sounds that are within a given name are represented in when we write it out, even if you don't always enunciate them, so that communities from James Bay all the way down to Florida can read the name, and even if they see that there's all these extra letters or vowels, if they pronounce it, they'll be able to see their community's representation of that name in there.
Before you go into that, Junaid,
yes,
we've come across another challenge, and I would love if we could summon Joe for him to explain this process. We've come to another challenge, which is the integrity of knowledge and what gets reflected. We're doing a second pamphlet, a second material, a second resource in English, for Winterbirds. And we've come to understand that there is information related to language of a name, but there is a gap of biological knowledge of indigenous biological knowledge of that bird. And so Joe is our birder, and sometimes the understanding of the biology of that from an indigenous perspective collides with the understanding of the linguistic name of it. And then there's the Western knowledge of that bird that in many cases help us to understand who the name belongs to. And so not only have we gone into full vowel form, we're trying to go into full information, not seeing with two eyes, but seeing the whole picture. And so that has been a challenge that we're confronting. And I want to see if Joe is summoned to explain our process.
No.
Yeah.
Ah!
I want to hear Junaid.
Wow.
Let's go, Junaid.
Oh, what? Yo, man, listen, I didn't know you were gonna do anything other than show us your lady slippers. And all right, fine. So our process starts with before when I began speaking to you, which seems like hours ago, I'm so sorry, that Joe has a massive list of names. So we sit down with a name, and our first approach is linguistic, where we look at a name and try to...
You're missing
What?
something. Name
No.
is not connected to bird. We have just names.
Yes, exactly. We just have a name. So we sit down with a name and look at it linguistically first. And so based on all the different language resources that we have available to us, we'll sit down, we'll analyze a name, and we'll come up with some sort of explanation of what that name is trying to say. And then Joe will often just reach out to our esteemed language committee, which includes his mom, and message her and aunties, and message her to say, hey, what does this sound mean to you? And once we have a sense from her that we are on the right path, we'll try to create an explanation that has a biological or some form of scientific backing to it as well, and then present all of our reasoning to a panel of language experts. And then for our winter birds session, also to Helen Roy, who then give us feedback, and then we'll sort of fully formed names hopefully send out into the world. Joe, you left, so I guess I did terrible.
Fantastic. That's exactly what we do.
Joe, can you explain this with Dindisin and Wingwish?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, I get the last one. Okay. So this is one of my my favorite reasons for this project is how a lot of the times in a lot of the communities that we go to, this knowledge has been greatly reduced. And so, you know, it's a big project to sort of bring as much information into this as we can to get close to the correct name. So in a lot of communities for Blue Jays or Canada Jays, we will interchange these two names you see there, Dean Desi and Guinguish. In some communities, a blue jay is Dean Desi, and in some communities, it's Guinguish. And in a lot of communities, they even have different families will say different names for the same species. And I always thought that one is a Canada jay and one name is going to be attributed to the blue jay, because so far for each of these bird names that we work with, they're incredibly specific to very important like the names are a responsibility to capture an essence or identity of that particular thing. So they're really specific, and we sort of we'll take some of these names and I'll reach out to my mom and then our broader language community, but we think about this a lot internally as well and do a lot of our own research. And so when we were looking into try to figure out Dean Desi, what does this word mean? Not attributed to any bird, just Dean Desi, what does these sounds mean when they are put together in this way? And in the Shabemwin, Desi is a belly button. And so Dean Desi is sort of describing a responsibility of something to be connecting, to be responsible for connection, and then to accomplish disconnection and to reestablish that connection again. So there's all of this sort of explanation just with the sounds of Dean Desi, not attributing this to any bird in particular yet, but just looking at what the sounds mean: connection, disconnection, reconnection. And the reason why I think we attribute this to the blue jay, Dean Desi, as a blue jay, is because of the blue jays' role and responsibility in the forest is there are like, it even helps because they're blue. They're like Facebook. They connect you to everything that's around you. They tell you all of the drama. There's a squirrel over here doing this. There's a grouse over here bullying this. And then the deer is coming. Oh, and this guy is hunting. And then your morning is ruined. And so blue jays are always connecting you to everything. They're the most amazing with their repertoire of in their voice. They connect you to everything around you. And then when they have kids, they disconnect. They totally leave. You can't hear them anymore. You don't know what's happening around you all of the time. And then in the fall, when they're teaching their kids how to call, all of that connection happens again. And so you know everything that's happening around you. So we think Dean Desi is a blue jay. And this was a very good sort of process of elimination for us because Guinguish, the Canada jay, was really fascinating because when we're thinking about it, Guinguish is describing something that is like describing something that's kind of gross. When I asked my mom, she sounds like Guinguish Put it on the Gwingwish slide there, whoever is controlling this. When you say Gwingwish, it sounds like something really gross is coming out of your face and getting coming out of your face. And so that was the only explanation that we got, right? And so Gwingwish, when Andrés and Junaid did the research to understand about Canada J and to figure out what essence is this sort of capturing, Canada Jays have this, they have, let's see if I could say it with the biologist waiting in the wings. They have salivary glands that are the same size as a woodpecker, or as most woodpeckers.
Good job.
Yeah.
Which is
and it's
very rare with a songbird. For a songbird to have salivary glands that big is incredibly rare and was a scientific question up until the 80s.
And it's so that was only solved very recently. And then the saliva itself is very sticky, and their job, what the Canada Jays do, and this is very important if you live in the north, is they will cache their food using their sticky saliva. They'll stick their food to the base of trees. But the reason why this is important for people in the north is because the Canada Jay knows how much snow is going to fall this season, and they will make sure that their cache of food is higher than the snow will pack beneath the tree. So they will always have access to it. So if you want to know how much snow is going to fall throughout the winter, you listen to the Canada Jay and you go and you find how high are they storing all of their food with the sticky fluid that comes out of their face. So we call them Gwingwish, and Blue Jays are Dindasi. And with this sort of methodology, looking at every bit of information that we could possibly consider, we're able to figure out which name belongs to which species. And we're able to share this with a lot of communities, so they're able to sort of settle a lot of internal debates, and not just settle them, not just settle the debate for the debate's sake, but I think it is the important application of knowledge and how do I say, not just settling the debate for the debate's sake, but the community is empowered with the knowledge and full understanding of why. So it's not just the name has been solved. The name has been solved, and we've looked through the lens of so many different disciplines to be able to determine this. And it's a process. We're doing this because we think that this is going to get us the closest to accurate, and not foolproof. So, I guess we will have mistakes eventually, but these were Gwingwish and Dindasi.
Some things to say here, and then a question to ask Joe is, in one of our workshops, a participant said, "Oh, thank you very much. One of those names is my last name." And so they found out the name of their last name. The second thing is, Joe, given that we're talking about jays, could you give a gift to our friends from the West on what is the name of a magpie and why is it named like that?
Oh, wow, that's right. Oh, this is so fascinating. Yeah, so here in Ontario with Anishinaabe, within Anishinaabe, within our territory, we have really particular names. It's not just Anishinaabe language either. It's all of the like languages, Algonquins, Cree speakers. We all have the same name for all of these different birds. It's been so fun to look at that so far. But when you're looking at some of the species that are very common here, like a raven, Gagagashi, the raven, we have some species that are similar, but it's not a raven. So we put a suffix in the beginning, or a prefix in the beginning of the word, to make it similar to, but not ours. So we have the word for raven as Gagagashi, and we have another raven that comes here sometimes, but it's not ours. So we say a pishagagage. It's a pishagagagashi. It's like a raven, but it's not a raven. It's not ours. It's from somewhere else. We have loons as well. The Pacific loon, a pishamong. We have greater white-fronted goose. It's not a Canada goose, but it's like a Canada. It's like a nika, but it's not a nika. So we call it a pishanika, the greater white-fronted goose. And so the magpies, for us, we call them like a raven, but it's not a raven, but it's like a raven, but it's not our raven.
And I wanted Joe to say this because when it comes to traditional knowledge and technical traditional knowledge, you can see how discovering the names of birds actually brings understanding to scientific questions we have to this date, and even management questions, right? If I've come across people saying that we need to kill cormorants because they are an invasive species, but they have an Anishinaabe-Moan name. So why would they have an Anishinaabe-Moan name if they are an invasive species? It makes no sense. And then one final thing I would like to add to this, because this is our final slide, is the tragedy of the Canada jay. This bird here in there is now named Canada jay as of like 20 years ago or 15. There was a contest nationwide to name it. And the name for that bird was Wasaka-Jack, which then transformed into Whiskey Jack because people couldn't pronounce it. And Wasaka-Jack is the trickster for the Algonquins. And so the only bird in Canada that I know of that had an indigenous name got renamed for Canada jay. I find that a tragedy. And I wanted to share that. I always share it in all of our presentations because there was such an excitement that we had the Canada jay and it was only to Canada, right? And at some point they thought about making it the Canadian bird or the bird of Canada. And so, yeah, I think that is it.
I know we went over time. Really appreciate everyone's time. I have the 3 questions that y'all shared with us at the beginning. We can just go over those, but please.
Heléna is gonna.
Yeah, okay, all right. Telling me.
Chimigwech, thank you so much. Chimigwech, that was phenomenal knowledge sharing.
Con mucho gusto.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And I'm just so excited that like we mentioned before you guys got started, this cross-cultural sharing that's happening between Anishinaabe territory and Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And even then between your own nations that you guys come from
Costa Rica, Pakistan. And that's the funny thing. Many people say, oh, you guys do so amazing two-eyed seeing. And we're like, no, we don't. That's not what we do. We build a case for a bird and we put that case out there. We think it's the best case. And we're also not really aiming to decolonize anything, but we accidentally decolonize stuff. And so, yeah, that's something that happens. We just kind of share knowledge.
Yeah, and I know you have those questions, but I'm gonna tailor them a little bit to what we heard from you. And you ended off, Andrés, with that awareness that a name was consciously chosen that placed a bird almost under like ownership of a colonial state of Canada. And there's a lot of work, similarities happening in Maplewood Flats and the work you guys are doing for decolonizing bird names. And I wanted to ask you, since you ended on that question, what is the role of renaming or decolonizing bird names for upholding Indigenous sovereignty and ultimately towards land back? And I want to share an image really quickly, and then I'll stop sharing my screen. What do you guys see?
Nothing.
Oh,
Nothing
no.
yet.
Okay.
It just says that you have started screen sharing, but I don't see your screen.
No problem. Give me 1 second. It is an infographic from, how about now?
Oh
Yes.
yeah. Okay. Yes.
This is from the Yellowhead Institute, and
Oh yeah. Yeah.
they're showing these different entry points into reconciliation, and there's right in the middle between symbolic reconciliation, easy reconciliation, and impactful reconciliation is renaming. And so I think it's really interesting because we're having this conversation about upholding Indigenous knowledges, about working towards Indigenous sovereignty. And so renaming is important. But what is this transition towards this symbolic, easy, impactful renaming to this transformative reconciliation where we see justice for Indigenous peoples and land back?
That is a fantastic. Wait, Andrés, do you want to go first?
No, I was just gonna say that I don't think I have the capacity to answer that question. I think Joe should give it a first stab because I once asked Joe what he thought about renaming birds that had eponyms, and his answer was a bit shocking to me. So I would like to see what Joe thinks about it.
Same dealio. I thought you were just gonna tell her yourself.
No, I leave that to you.
I think because of the work that we're doing, the how do I say, the responsibility that we have when we apply our methodology appropriately, properly, the names that we come up with, or the names that the Anishinaabe names that are out there.
Okay, can I jump? Maybe you'll get something from what I say, because ultimately, our project, we're not aiming to rename or forget or change necessarily the nomenclature that goes around. Our interest is in getting people to understand the value and the incredibly connected nature of Anishinaabe when it comes to understanding where you live. You live in Ontario. If you live in Ontario, these names tell you far more, and this is just a drop in the bucket. We will often say that our work is more to encourage learning of Anishinaabe within communities. So like some of our favorite projects are going to work with youth and working with them on just any nomenclature at all, but trying to show the incredible depth of knowledge and how that knowledge helps you understand the world that you're living in based on the land base that you're on. And so, those three things, I totally agree that naming does overlap those three components because it can be seen as very easy. And I would argue that often will happen in the case of like Wab Gok Gok Gok, where if you put in very little effort, go and ask just some second language speaker what the name of something is, and they happen to give you like an answer that is based on their interpretation and not, linguistic history, you may end up spreading misinformation. So it's kind of easy. It's the lowest hanging fruit in that way. It's very impactful because that name can hopefully help like somebody understand their last name or their clan or whatever. And so that's really key. But our goal with this project is the birds are just a vessel. It just happened to be that there's a lot of interest around birds, especially like it's grown over the pandemic. It just like really ballooned, and we wanted to take advantage of that interest to get some of these bigger ideas out there, because these ideas exist in nomenclature for plants in like crazy depth as well. But that's a part of Anishinaabe knowledge that community members are not fully comfortable with us sharing because there is so much just stealing of that sort of pharmaceutical valuable knowledge. So this is just like a vessel for us to be able to share or chip into these much larger ideas of like, you can't talk about Gaga Gashi without talking about the integrity of a hemlock forest, and what does that integrity look like when the people who named it, how do we support their uvulas in the process of supporting this?
I think that Joe has cooked.
I think Joe has something
now. Yeah.
Yes. There you go. See, I tried to give you time.
You're muted.
Oh, wait, you're mute. I'll unmute you.
Yeah, sorry. I think that the Anishinaabe names, you know, maybe not to be like a central thing. You know, I really appreciate scientific taxonomy and properly or positive identification of things. But when it comes to relationships and responsibilities and your role within this place, the Anishinaabe names hold an incredible amount of value, an incredible amount of information that would benefit everybody, birders, researchers. You know, we're trying to look at this kind of work that we're doing and how it can inform species at risk research, how it can help create proper questions or more direct questions for certain species, you know, to be able to provide the support that they need. And so, just like what Andrés said, just to be responsible in including Anishinaabe names for, you know, different resources because of the value that they carry. I'm a huge fan of memories of the past. I've always keep like of eponyms we understand, but I'm not I'm not of the just me personally, I guess, not of the mindset of tearing down the statues or something like this because of a horrible person, but to remember we may be responsible for remembering a lot of these certain things so that they can never happen again. If we erase a lot of this history that happened in ornithology, they could have the potential to resurface and cause the same devastation again. And so I'm a fan of constantly reminded and remembering and considering everything whenever you're learning about a particular bird. Yeah.
Complicated
Andrés,
answer. You want me to have a
I
go at
didn't.
it?
I wanted you to give you the floor if you wish.
No, I think these guys have covered a lot of what we do. I cannot avoid being a biologist and being trained on Western science. And I know the usefulness of the scientific taxonomy for management decisions. If you were to erase that and just use one paradigm, which would support other purposes, you would be losing stuff too. And so what Joe said is, to me, that time I asked him about eliminating eponym, he said, keep them all. And so we don't pick and choose, we just recover and share. That's what we do.
In your presentation, what stood out to me is this, and this is something I've learned from being an Anishinaabe and learning from Anishinaabe for years, the importance of relationality. And one of our questions that we wanted to ask you in today's purpose of learning more about our responsibility as non-Indigenous people in this type of land-based education towards Indigenous sovereignty. And I was wondering if you could maybe speak to a bit of that connection between relationality and responsibility of settlers, particularly in what you were just saying when answering that last question about Anishinaabe telling you about your responsibility to place. And maybe this is something that, again, could have teachings cross-culturally across Anishinaabe territory and Tsleil-Waututh territory as well.
So I think Junaid is the best person to answer this, because he's kind of the one that started a lot of this. But I just want to tell you a story that happened to us at Catawba First Nation. Catawba First Nation is this group of, it's a very small First Nation that really support our work, and their territory holds one of the best birding spots in North America and in the world, called Point Pelee. And this is part of their territory and a lot of land claims. And these two ladies we work with, they love us and we love them. And when I was doing a presentation, I said, I'm not indigenous to Costa Rica. And then later on, she came to me and she said, what do you mean by you're not indigenous to Costa Rica? We're indigenous to somewhere, all of us. And that led me into a gigantic rabbit hole of what does indigenous and settler means, and am I indigenous to somewhere or am I not? And does it really matter? And I'm not saying it does not matter, obviously. It does matter tremendously. I'm right now dealing with a case of a pretendian, and I'm trying to support the Algonquins into tackling this, so I know that it matters. But the question still remains in my brain. Am I a settler? Am I indigenous? The one thing that does stand out to me is that I'm in a new land, not where I was born. And I need to understand that better. And I need to connect to that land better. And that's why I think Junaid can tackle this question when it comes to responsibilities. The responsibilities to the land. And there was also a group of humans before another group of humans. If you start thinking about the Incas were a group of indigenous people that became the empire in South America over hundreds of other First Nations in just 100 years, and then they collapsed. What does it mean there? Were they settlers? Were they not? When it comes to Europe, who is indigenous to England? And what does it mean being a settler there? And so I think this question is incredibly complex, and I'll let Junaid tackle it.
For me, the biggest aspect of engaging or sort of bringing in non-Indigenous people into these spaces is recognizing that, and this is, you know, this is not always the easiest thing to do, but recognizing that there were names before you thought there were names of things. Okay, like hands down, there was knowledge before there was English. And that in itself is hopefully a niggling idea that sticks in, you know, a 12-year-old's brain or somebody's brain, where they're like, oh, okay, so there's things that predate Cooper's Hawk being named after a New Yorker named William Cooper. There was a different thing. So what is this difference? But what that connection, I hope, sort of leads to is that there were rules and laws that predate all the things that we have to follow as part of this structure that was put on top of a structure that already existed for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So yeah, we know what, you know, rules we have to follow. We even know what we can and cannot recycle. We know all these little bits and pieces. All we're saying is that there's an additional, you know, incredibly diverse and elucidating and like enriching set of rules that if you engage with them, you will have a better life here, because that's just the truth of it. Like we don't have to have scientific literature to back this. You just, if you know that you need to go and pay attention to Gwingwish in the fall, then you won't be caught off guard when there's like 10 feet of snow outside of your house. There are legitimate, you know, seeds and jewels that help you enrich your life here. And that is sort of our approach, I guess, to bringing people into this work, or trying to encourage them to get involved in this in their own way, shape, or form. Language may not be for everybody, but however you decide to engage with this, there is a system that predates the system that we currently live in. And we, I guess, are the spokespeople that go around being like, we guarantee it'll make your life better and more diverse.
Maybe Joe has an answer. Joe, what is the role that Junaid and I have played in being your co-walkers?
Accomplices.
I like co-walkers.
Co-walkers.
Remember from the Anishinaabe Moine?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we co-walk.
What do you mean?
Yeah,
I think
we were just asked that what is the role that settlers should have into decolonizing, and have we been doing that for you?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is there. Yeah, no, Junaid covered it. You covered it as well. There's just how do you say? I think one of the things that these guys do very well for me in a project like this is actually, you know what I wanted to say?
Say it.
Is that I think a lot of that responsibility is on me in these discussions to not uh to not to not fight back, to not want to always be right, to not to submit to what we know to be scientifically accurate and true. In a lot of the work that I do in community, because we don't have that scientific rigor in our methods and in the people who I'm getting these bird names from, I feel like a lot of this responsibility is on me to learn. And I could see, I mean, like in when this happens in other communities, and projects like this have tried to happen multiple times in my community, and they usually just end they don't end well. They haven't ended well. That's why we don't have a complete Anishinaabe bird guide. Is because a lot of them have not really gone so well. Is because we want to fight back too. Can't tell me that I'm wrong. But how many times have we entered into trying to figure out a particular species of bird name, and I am just out to lunch, and I just have to accept that there's no way that this name belongs to that species. There's absolutely nothing here. And you have a lot of people who will dig their heels in and say, nope, that's what my mom said. And meanwhile, you're going off of a misidentification of a species from when you were 6-year-old and you didn't have binoculars. It's like they're really hard conversations to have. And there's so much emotion, and I have to abandon that when we enter into this project. And so I actually feel like a lot of the responsibility is on me to ensure that this project is going the way that it should,
Thank
and that you guys do a really good job in fighting back appropriately.
Rarely.
in the learning and teaching we do in the IESS program at Trent, where we're talking about bringing knowledge systems together, we talk about all these complexities of human nature when you're bringing together people. And then we have this layer on top of knowledge equity, which we understand in the work that we do to be an anti-colonial process within knowledge equity of upholding knowledge systems that have been here since time immemorial, and refusing a dominant knowledge system that has historically and continuously oppressed and made silent Indigenous knowledges. So I think I appreciate you for sharing your personal experiences doing this work, because I don't think it's even like a one size fits all a journey and experience either. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm not
Yeah,
sure if
Joe puts me up to get yelled at by language speakers. That's how I help Joe.
And his
I get yelled at.
aunties.
All the aunties know to yell at Junaid.
And my role is to challenge Joe.
Yeah.
So he's got certainty, and I challenge Joe.
And it all works.
Sometimes.
Yeah, hopefully,
we're still friends. And we're
Junaid,
still working through names.
Junaid is the first to go under any bus, any language speaker's bus, any bird imitation requirement. Junaid is under that bus.
Yep. And when that person says, no, this is what my mom said, it's my job to then be like, well, respectfully, let's have a 2-hour conversation where you yell at me and Joe and Andrés walk away.
There was this one time in which an elder told us that, passenger pigeons ate mice, deer mice, and that's why Lyme disease became prevalent. And so I remember us having a conversation. How do we deal with this information? What is this? And I asked Joe, this person is named and understood as an elder. How do I process this wrong knowledge, right? And so, yeah, we go through very complicated conversations.
I'm gonna pass it back to Irwin. I know that he has some insight and knowledge to share.
Thanks, Heléna. Yeah, I mean, that's the question is a profound one, and so I'm really appreciating this conversation. And I think it's relationships are really central to unpacking this, because I think it's there's so much performative reconciliation. There's so much misunderstanding of, and the reconciliation is even weaponized now, and it's seen as like, and I even just think about the new federal government that's coming, right? That even discounts that these are all things from the past, and why don't we just move on as a society? And but then I'm reminded of the words of Brenna Bandar, a UBC professor South Asian legal scholar who looks at the racial regimes of property, and we think about how we are on the land and whose land and who owns the land and who benefits from this. And these are all, especially here in the Tsleil-Waututh territory here in Metro Vancouver, it's very fresh. It's just a couple of generations, 3-4 generations really. So just to minimize the inequity is very dangerous, I think. And so I think we really champion words like settlers and migrants, just because if you're an Anishinaabe here in Coast Salish territory, you're also a migrant, and so there's protocols and again relationships that are negotiated through protocols. So I think, and I'm often guided by Cleve and Ali's, the Leidene activist scholar who talked a lot about the ally industrial complex and really warned us about that risk of red washing and social washing. And so it's a profound question. And I think that's what we're doing this land-based learning about, is to think about how are these roles and who carries these roles and what are our obligations. So just really champion us discussing this deeper. And there's no simple answer. And it's also place-based. And what might work in a 400-year-old colonial settlement versus a fresh settlement here on the West Coast, those are also unique elements. So yeah, thanks, Heléna, for including my voice here.
Miigwech, thank you. And that place-based piece is so important. And maybe we're at a 30-ish minute mark or less left, and thinking about place-based knowledges. I'm curious to hear if there's folks joining outside of Anishinaabe territory that have questions or comments, insights to similarities or differences, that want to comment, question, or share. Either from your room there at Maplewood Flats or in our Zoom room here.
Yeah, there's some really very experienced people on the Zoom, so I really want to thank all of you for attending, and please put your camera on or unmute yourself and feel free to join in. It's been a very rich and dynamic conversation. We covered a lot of ground and a lot of physical territory all across this land of Canada. And also want to remind folks that just a couple of weeks ago, we did have the Decolonizing Bird Knowledge Symposium here in this room. It was packed. We had about 75 to 80 people in the room, and we had a few dozen online. And those recordings are starting to be posted on our Maplewood Flats YouTube channels. So do check those out. Really, like the starting point was the bird names that y'all were talking about a few minutes ago. And then it goes to deeper questions about settler accomplice work and whose land we're birding on. I see Rita.
If I could just share for a second.
Go ahead, Les.
I'd just like to share, and I raise my hands for your guys' words and the slides. And I had a great uncle who, what we call is the keeper of the land. That's who we are. We're protectors of this land. And I believe that it's the importance of truth before reconciliation needs to be heard. And I really like that we're bringing back the how do I say it? Traditional words. I really like that you guys are doing that. And back in 2010, there was a little bit of a start for that, but I'm talking about with the highways on the roads. They're changing the names. And I really believe in my heart that that's the change that we need to see. I'm first generation non-residential school, so both my parents went. My brother went to day school, and the language is very important. It's something that I had no interest in, but when I hear it, it gives me that feeling. I know when I hear it, it makes me feel good, and I know the truth is coming out. I go around and I present the truth, and my son and my daughter-in-law are both keepers of the language, what I call keepers of the language. And I'm one of the knowledge holders here in Tsleil-Waututh. And again, I raise my hands for your guys' words, because it's really important that this carries on. It's something that we need to pass on to the next generation. Oh, see them.
Gracias.
Thank you, Les.
See, Madeline is on here, and Rita Wong. Anyone else want to jump in?
So Madeline did ask a question which we've come across a couple of times, and it's a really fascinating conversation, which is she'd be curious to hear any conversations that have happened with our project around migratory birds. And this is the cool part, right? Because so many of the birds that come to Ontario, they're not technically like, you know, our birds. Like, we describe them as like, oh, they winter in the south, because when there's snow up here, they go south. But you know, down south, they probably because there isn't snow, they're just like, oh, they summer up north. So where ultimately are these birds, you know, from? Are so many of the species that we get here in the spring and summertime are all coming from South America, are all coming from where Andrés is, you know, 847 species of birds. And we have here in Ontario, at least just about 400 or so. And many of those 400 come from that 800 down in Costa Rica. Our only species of hummingbird comes from Costa Rica. And so, you know, what part of the world is considered these birds like home, and whether you know, whether they're emigrating from Costa Rica, or are they emigrating from Canada? And there are a lot of, you know, ways that we can answer this from like the Western taxonomic perspective. But I think it brings about a really interesting conversation of a linguistic analysis that has to expand beyond just Anishinaabe, okay, which goes all the way down to Florida, but then beyond that into, you know, Mexican and further south territory, where names may exist for species that exist here as well. The species exist here, but their names are different.
Bobolinks. Bobolinks go from the grasslands in Canada all the way to the Patagonia, to the grasslands of La Patagonia, to a very specific region going through Costa Rica and through so many places. Maybe that's the funny thing about being Costa Rican, because the First Nations in Costa Rica were like transient First Nations. And so people from Mexico and Guatemala would go down south and go through Costa Rica and leave artifacts and knowledge from North America, while Incas and other nations from South America would go through Costa Rica all the way up for commerce. And so, yeah, as people moved, there were names. And so I don't know if they called each other immigrants or not, but they were moving and exchanging. Because the barriers and the borders are colonial, right? And those borders are the ones that define the concept of immigrant and immigration. And so I would even challenge that concept in many ways. But I'm a bit biased. I'm an immigrant.
Me too. the really interesting part of this migratory component that comes up for our work in the Ontario context, at least, is that even within Anishinaabe, you are in migratory zones. Like from Florida to Hudson Bay, there's a lot of birds that switch positions throughout all the different seasons. And so there is a portion of our project that has not fully been undertaken yet, but is kind of on the horizon, which is to go into much farther northern communities to understand their names for species that go from southern Ontario up to James and Hudson Bay to reproduce, and hence show different types of behaviors and human connections,
Plumages, different colorations
than they would do down here. And so
We
that relevance still exists.
we have not found a single name for warblers, and we would believe that they would be in the boreal forests where they reproduce. And so if there is a nation that could have those names, they're in the boreal. And then we have a mess with ducks, in which we have many duck names. And then we're thinking that in Wapple Island, where it's one of the most continentally important sites for ducks, maybe some duck names are there. And so, yeah, we just kind of need money and time.
Doing it though.
Well, Leanne Simpson talks about in her book, As We've Always Done, she talks about Anishinaabe internationalism, and she extends that to other Indigenous nations, but also to our animal nations, our plant nations, the bird nations as well. So I think it's interesting that you're discussing this migration of birds through different nations' territories, but in themselves, they can be considered this nation to have relationships with them. So I think, to me, when I think about like how we learn in an anti-colonial way, I go back to those original intentions. So, and you shared this in that in the Anishinaabe creation story, who came first, who came last, humans coming last. When I try to work and live in an anti-colonial way, I'm returning to what are these original intentions of the place that I live in, and how does that inform these relationships? So I think that's still where we're trying to get to. How does this inform these settler relationships and responsibilities? And we know this is a big question that we're asking, but I'm grateful for the contributions you've shared. Are there any other?
I'll just add, I know Isabella has a question, but I'll just circle back to this conversation we've just been having in the slogan of the conference we just had 2 weeks ago on decolonizing bird knowledge. The slogan was, "We didn't cross the borders crossed us." And we use that deliberately. It's a famous Azan Underground song from Los Angeles, but we use it because, we're trying to think about the bird's perspective, and it's humbling and embarrassing, that our organization, the Wild Bird Trust of BC, was stewarding a site here, and we didn't include the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, which is literally adjacent to the site. So our 256 acres, we pretended that there's this bubble, that the birds, these were our birds in this bubble that we were stewarding, totally ignorant of the fact that the Tsleil-Waututh Nation was doing more for our own mandate than we were for our mandate. And yet we excluded the Tsleil-Waututh Nation from these traditional lands that they had stewarded for 99.5% of the history of this land. So, it's on us. The egg is on our face, with that kind of arrogance in hiding in our own kind of white supremacist ideas of the world. But Isabel, I think you got a question.
Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. I really enjoyed how you shared the one of the last slides about the process of how you do work. And my question would be, as someone that's part of the team working on land-based, decolonizing land-based education and trying to build frameworks and pedagogies, how, from all the different work and things that you do, how have you, I guess, approach the methods in which you share the knowledge and how do you say that? Like physically speaking, how do you choose how you share the knowledge? And yeah, what is that process like? Is internally, and then with people that either reach out to you or you connect with.
So
That was
I
nice.
had closed our presentation before the very last slide, but our pilot educational material as part of this project was releasing a pamphlet with about 15 bird names with the support of Wequemacong First Nation, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Birds Canada. And that was sort of the most accessible format that we had to our disposal at the time to try and get just this knowledge and this information and to try to see the interest in communities in this work. And that is sort of one small piece. So much of our work is actually doing kind of talks and presentations like this and speaking with people about the names and the processes in much more detail than a pamphlet or even a book possibly could hold. And we're still trying to figure out, and Andrés alluded to this earlier too, that we're still trying to figure out the most effective way to disseminate this knowledge in a way that is like, you know, real delicious to eat up, because you're like, oh, the same size as a woodpecker's salivary glands, how cool. But if you were to really actually sit down and break down that name, you would end up writing pages about it because it's connecting you to so many other parts of creation. You're talking about the fun in that name, you're talking about trees, you're talking about a whole bunch of different processes. And so, you know, what we're able to currently offer in written form is very much the kind of Cliff's Notes, or even those of the things that we're discovering, and then being able to share in larger, you know, groups like this to actually have discussions around the process. And then so much of our time is spent with sort of language speakers and them just critiquing everything we've come up with. And the stuff that we provide to them is a lot more dense. It's like a page of our thoughts and why and stories and scientific backing and so on. And then for them to sort of critique and give back their linguistic understanding. And then it's our job to sort of figure out how to respectfully include that in a way that, again, is like fun and chewy for people to, and hopefully a little bit shifting, you know, because people have shared with us the fact that just knowing that there are all these names for all these different species in Anishinaabe-Moin is like amazing to school boards, for example. So yeah, we work with people at many different sort of entry points, and it really just depends on how, like what the capacity of the audience that we're speaking to is in terms of how we end up sharing it.
So I think there are 4 things here. One is ethics, another one is process, another one is sustainability, and another one is effectiveness. When it comes to ethics, Joe is the owner of this knowledge. We just support whatever he needs. When it comes to process, Joe quite accurately said, speakers are dying. We need to get these names as fast as we can. When it comes to effectiveness, Junaid has quite clearly stated, we find the method that is the most effective to people. And when it comes to sustainability, we need to make it in a way in which we could generate enough resources to continue the work. And so that would be kind of the 4 easy ways of putting it. We have to balance those 4 at all times.
Oh,
Miigwech, I'm writing down notes like crazy.
Yeah, and that's why we always start with we're not indigenous, and that's why Joe is always on the hook. He goes like, guys, I cannot go to this presentation. We're like, Joe, you're kind of the knowledge keeper, man. You got to be there. It's like, we've learned this from you, so you have to go because that's it. You know, this is Anishinaabemowin knowledge. Anishinaabeg knowledge. This is, yeah. And sometimes it makes you think about how knowledge should be understood in the world and its ownership in general for any type of knowledge. But those are philosophical questions that many smarter people than I have thought about for ages. Joe,
I'm not sure.
open
It's
his
Joseph.
camera.
Yeah, it looks like he's gonna say something. I was curious about this whole contradiction of like this fetishization of birds specifically because you know ornithologists and birders really love to just focus on birds and discount the land, the indigenous knowledge, the slugs, the insects. Seems to be an ongoing contradiction because we're generally trying to bring the birding community along with us on this redress journey. And we're trying to do it gently because we know as settler allies, if we don't do it well, then the blowback is not going to go back on us. It's going to go back on the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. So it's complicated.
We've engaged with birders many times and we've
All
not
the
done
time.
it gently.
Yeah. Oh my God. Dude, listen, we did a keynote for the Ontario field ornithologists, and that is the most uncomfortable that room had ever been. But that's
In their whole life.
That's part of my and Andres's job here.
Exactly,
Like,
make them
it
uncomfortable.
shouldn't be, as you said really well, Irwin, at the beginning, that it really shouldn't just be the responsibility of the Tsleil-Waututh people or the indigenous people to that particular land to be the ones who are constantly having to advocate for this type of change, and the type of change that at least we're able to talk about in a 40-minute presentation. It's very tiny. It's like, just recognize that these people are here, their knowledge is spectacular, and that you should do far more to support this. But even just that is like uncomfortable to put people into those places. But I think it's easier coming from immigrants like Andres and myself, because we can put ourselves into that same boat and be
I
like,
would
listen,
not
man,
use
this ain't
the
ours
word
either.
I would not use the word easy, but less risky, as believe me, as an immigrant with my interactions with birders, they have not been pleasant at all. And I've had to grow a very thick skin to be able to interact with many of them.
They have
And
You
photos.
guys been here too short, man.
Oh, shoot.
I wanted to say to the previous question there, the most important thing for me was speed. I think either Andres or Junaid mentioned that the speed is the most important thing. I'm because of Facebook, I see how quickly everyone is leaving. A lot of resources that I've used in the past for bird names have gone just this past year. So before I got a chance to go back to that community to visit again. But the most important thing for us was speed, and we had considered university involvement. We considered writing grants and awaiting approval, and all these different avenues, all these different things we could have did. By far the fastest way for us to be able to do it was by kind of creating a business in and of itself. So we kind of used like a business model to be able to support our projects speed, and also because we all have our own jobs and are running our own businesses in totally different fields usually, and so we just wanted to be able to do everything quickly. So we chose to do pamphlets. We'll have 2 soon, but then those 2 will turn into a few more, and then we'll have enough for larger resources and a broader repertoire of educational materials. I think educational materials are going to be the most important for us for the goals that we have, but also income-wise to be able to drive the project further and faster.
Bye-bye, Gloria. Yeah, the mature project in Joe's mind looks like a group of language experts and elders that can bring a new name to birds that lost their names.
Yeah, that'd be the best.
And I just put in the chat where people can purchase that pamphlet if they wish.
And you could get it when the strike ends.
Yeah, yeah. Bus
Right.
strike.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's any other last comments over at Maplewood Flats. Otherwise, sorry, we can say a big
Yeah, maybe just, I'd love to hear a closing word from Les, and I think we're good. Anyone else have a comment here? We're good, probably here. Thank you, Heléna, for all your hosting.
My pleasure.
Oh, see him. Again, it filled my heart to hear this information because, as I mentioned, first generation, I'm learning these things. And what crosses my mind sometimes is the elders when they're telling me things. I pass it on to the next generation. But also when I hear things from my son, he's a language keeper and he knows these lands very well. He keeps these lands and he passes this knowledge on to me, and I take that in too. And as knowledge holders, that's what we do. We take these in, and I raise my hands to you guys for sharing your guys' knowledge with us. And we have similar teachings here on our territories. And when something comes up, we turn to the elders and ask for the right meanings, and then we take it into on pen to paper. And again, I thank you for allowing us to listen to your guys' words today. And before we go, I'd just like to share, if I have time, do I have time to share another song? Osium. And this song is from my grandfather. And this song is a song we still use today. And when one of our loved ones pass into what I call the spirit world. And also when our young ones come into this world, we celebrate that. And I also, when our community members move on to a next level in their life, we share this song in the next stage. This is our prayer song. It's from my great grandfather, Tsleil-Waututh. Tsleil-Waututh, it was his given name. And when he was taken to residential school, they gave him the English name of Dan. And he put a footprint in for our people, for First Nations people. And after another year in residential school, they gave him a last name, which was George. And later on in life, he became a great chief in our territory. And that's who my grandfather is. That's where my words, my songs, and my teachings come from, as my late grandfather, Chief Dan George. Oh, see him. Oh, see him.
Thank you, Les, for ending us in that good way and helping our spirits throughout the virtual world here. It's funny how that can travel through Zoom, but it definitely does. So
I'd also like to wish everyone happy holidays from my heart to my family to your family.
thank you.
Happy holidays, Les. Thank you so much. Gracias.
Thank you.
Felices fiestas.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again, Junaid, Andrés, and Joe for your time. we're so grateful, and we know this knowledge will sit with us and continue as we move on with the rest of our day. And hope everyone travels safely there in Maplewood Flats area with the wind, and like Les said, enjoy the holiday time. Be safe, keep well.
Thank you
Thanks.
again to Maplewood Flats,
Oh.
Les, Jiménez, Osium. Thank you, Heléna, for creating all these connections. And yeah, hope to chat with you guys again.
Yeah. Osium, Chimigwech, pura vida, que estén bien. Shukriya.
Yeah,
And
shukriya.
our next event will be January the 20th. January the 20th. So welcome everybody back. It'll be 7 o'clock in the evening, so it'll be tough for our Eastern friends, but we'll be having a gathering here in this space and online. And the focus will be on land-based education. It'll be the learning circle number 3. How do we apply the face of Tsleil-Waututh on the land here? So thinking specifically about place and the work that we're doing here in Maplewood Flats, and what the role of education is on bringing Tsleil-Waututh knowledge, Tsleil-Waututh culture, Tsleil-Waututh economics, Tsleil-Waututh sovereignty rights to the land here. So welcome everyone back on January the 20th.
Oh, thanks
Take
everyone.
care, everybody.
Jiménez.